Well, I'm here with Justin Humphries, who is a friend. I've known him for a lot of years now, too many years, Justin. First met him in Exeter when I was working for Care for the Family, and he was working in partnership with a church down there that was doing some really great stuff. And he's moved on. So, Justin, welcome. What are you doing now? Who are you?
Ah, thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me on. Well, yeah, a lot of things have changed since then, haven't they? That seems like an
Absolutely.
awfully long time ago. But yeah, moving out of local church ministry as I was at that point into working in other environments. So in 2010, I joined what was then CCPAS, the Church's Child Protection Advisory Service, and that was really a very that was really a God thing, and God had been preparing me, had been giving me different life experiences, pulling a whole load of different things together in my life that meant that was the right move, the right place for me to be. So 2010, I joined CCPAS. And about 6 years later, I find myself becoming the joint chief executive of that organisation. And 2 years after that, we rebranded, renamed to what we are now, which is 31:8. And for those of your viewers and listeners that don't know what that's all about, well, that's a nod to Proverbs 31, verse 8, which says, "Speak up on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable." So it's our why, if you like. Why
Fantastic.
do we do the things that we do as an organisation? So we're a membership organisation. We're independent. We're non-denominational. We're overtly Christian. Serving predominantly the church in all its traditions and manifestations, churches, charities, groups of one kind or another, to help them create and maintain safer places, whatever that might look like.
Okay,
So it's a
okay.
privilege to be leading that.
Absolutely. And you know, it's already you've said something really interesting because it is fascinating, isn't it, how God weaves together what seem to be disparate experiences in our lives.
Mm,
And
mm,
it isn't
mm.
until you get to the point that you've obviously got to where you suddenly go, do you know, that experience I had makes perfect sense now. And that's
Yes,
interesting because I think the first time I met you, you came out of a social work background, didn't you?
I did. Oh, you got a good memory. I did indeed,
Oh,
yeah.
so even that was a preparation and a foundation, wasn't it, for what you're doing now, really?
It was that was very much part of it, and maybe just to summarise, my early years had been very chaotic, very unstable, abusive, um, being sort of pulled from pillar to post, in and out of care in my first 3 years of life,
Okay.
um, having all sorts of experiences that I won't go into now, but those really being a catalyst later on for my decision, following some significant divine prompting, I think I might add, to join the social work profession. So my personal experiences, my professional experiences, my time in church leadership, all of those things being brought together to hopefully be of some use and value where I find myself today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it reminds me of that statement of Joseph, you know, what you meant for evil and
Yes,
God meant for good. And so often that's the
yes,
case, isn't it? You know, the things that have been the greatest hurts and the greatest harm in our lives, God turns and uses and
yeah,
makes, in a way, makes the cause, the desire to actually make a difference in that area, our passion and then our
yes,
calling. And that's really interesting.
absolutely.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
So thinking about the future, do you know, I'm one of those people that I don't tend to look back very often at all, really. I tend
Mm,
to have
mm, mm,
I'm first foot forward. I'm always leaning into the wind. I'm wanting to know what's happening next. And I
mm,
suppose that's what inspired me to do a series on Future Church and get,
mm.
key individuals to actually talk about that and reflect on that. And you sprang to mind, So when you look at the church, not as it is now, but as you'd like it to be in 10 years' time, through the
Mm.
filter of what floats your boat and rings your bell, really, how do you see it? How do you see it in 10 years' time?
Well, I think this is a really critical question, Richard,
Right.
actually, because I am often saying in the various conversations I have that we as church need to be far more aspirational
Okay.
in what we are doing. The here and now is clearly important. Um, an acknowledgement of where we have come from, important,
Mm.
but envisioning where we want to be, where we need to be in my line of work is possibly quite challenging.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm often saying let's be more aspirational. Let's be strengths focused. So let's look and think, well, what do we want and need church to be, to look like, to feel like, for those that encounter it. There's lots of stuff that we don't do so well. And it would be very easy to get sidetracked with that or bogged down with that. And
Yes.
whilst it's important to acknowledge where we haven't done things well and do our very best to do them better for the future, that forward-looking thing that says, why would we not want the church as an embodiment of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit here on earth to be a safe place,
Yeah.
a welcoming place, a place of refuge, a place of healing, of restoration, of reconnection, all of those things. And if that's what we believe the church ought to be, then what do we need to do to get there? What are the things that we need to be deliberate about and intentional about? Because I think, maybe I've got a bit of a wild view here, but I think not much of that happens on its own or by mistake.
Yeah.
We have to go after it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Before we get on to what do we need to do, let's just unpack that a little bit. Because one of the things that's really struck me recently is that as we've become more effective in our mission, in our engagement with our community, church becomes messier. We
Yes.
are having, particularly given the fact that we are living in an age where, because of the permissive society, and where anything has gone, we are dealing with deeply damaged people who have either been the victims of somebody else's permissiveness or have inflicted upon ourselves as a consequence of there are no rules, you can do what you like as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. And so what I've discovered, certainly in the last 10 years, is that we are getting people coming into church who are deeply lost in the broadest possible sense of that term, not just in a spiritual sense, and are looking for meaning and purpose and a way out of the brokenness that they find themselves in. Now that's exactly what we should be as church, but it makes church a more dangerous place.
Yes.
And it strikes me that it's almost the good that we want to become in 10 years' time, let's say, where we are more effective in our mission, we are reaching out more, we are bringing hope and good news into the lives of people, is by dint of that, we need to get what you're about right. Would you agree with that? Is that
I really would, and I think that there's an important point in all of that, which is something that I've written about fairly recently, which is we need to stop seeing safeguarding as this thing that we do over there. The thing that it's all a little bit difficult. It's a bit bureaucratic. It's a little bit tick boxy, but we're being told by everyone that we have to do it, so we better do it. To it becoming fundamental and integral to who we are, what we do, why we do it. So safeguarding as mission in our church
yes,
is critical to our
absolutely.
understanding and the outworking of how we do that. And we have fantastic examples in the interactions that Jesus had with different people, where he offered them value where they had received none from anybody else. He gave them time. He dignified them. He respected them. He empowered them. And these people, for the most part, being the people that nobody was interested in
Yeah.
dignifying, giving time to, or empowering in general terms. But isn't that what we're here to do? If
Yes.
we are here to reflect who Jesus is, then it's incumbent on us to be thinking, well, how do we do those things?
Yes. Yes.
So it
Absolutely.
flips our thinking just a little bit, doesn't it? Because life is messy.
Yeah.
And if we say that as church we are here for all, then all is who we should be seeing.
Yes.
And that then means that we've got a whole load of stuff to deal with.
Yes. Yes. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when you were CCPAS, and safeguarding became much more on the agenda of the church than I
Mm,
probably think it had been ever before in history,
mm,
rightly or wrongly, but certainly formally. It was about protection. It
mm,
had, as it were, a negative spin on it. It was
mm,
about how do we keep people safe, but in a way that was about how do we protect ourselves from bad publicity and bad press,
yes.
rather than seeing it as creating a space of freedom where people
Mm,
can discover who they're meant to be. So let me give you an
yeah.
illustration of that. And we've got somebody in the life of the church that is trans, comes into church very
Mm,
vulnerable, very agitated most of the time because
mm,
of past experience and past background.
mm,
Not necessarily with regard to the trans issue, but with regard to all sorts of aspects of life. And you recognize suddenly as they come in and they start to become a part of us and a part of the family of the
mm,
church, that that safeguarding is as much about giving them space to be what nobody else has allowed them to be. And I
yes.
don't mean necessarily trans or all the other stuff and the other stuff
Yeah.
that comes with that, but to be.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
been really interesting to walk with them and have some fascinating conversations about why they find themselves where they are, why they identify themselves as they do, how that relates to their
Mm,
relationship to Christ and the church. And
mm,
and it's been both formative for them and for me, but it's not
yeah.
been about protection as such. It's not we're
Yeah.
protecting ourselves against them or in a
Yes.
way protecting them. It's about how do we create? I'm getting myself tongue-tied now trying to describe it. There's a freedom that goes with this, Justin. Is
Yeah.
that how you see
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I do very much so. I think there are um, the aspects of safeguarding which are about protection.
Yes.
They're about prevention.
Yes.
Those things are right. They must happen.
Yes.
But it's also about good responses. It's about healthy interactions. And ultimately, my view is that safeguarding, however you view it and wherever it takes place, is actually it's about growth. It's about flourishing.
Yes. 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 Yes.
So if you take that perspective and apply it to the situation you've just described, what do we need to do? How do we need to be with each other to encourage anybody to be here and to flourish?
Yes. Yes.
For some people, there may be protective elements. For others, it might just be about giving them the freedom and the safety and the opportunity to say some stuff that they might not have felt safe to say somewhere else. Whatever it is. So I think actually safeguarding in many ways, has become it's become a bit of a word that people don't like much.
Yeah.
It's come to represent negative things. It's come to represent things which restrict us rather than enable us.
Yes.
And I'm really very keen that we break that down so we'll actually know these are enablers, these are
Yeah.
facilitators, these are about how do we do whatever we do in a way that is safe for everybody and enables everyone to
Yeah.
flourish.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so that's a fantastic ideal. I mean, it really is. It's brilliant, and this is the sort of stuff that gets me up in the morning. This is the sort of stuff where I think, yeah, I want to be a part of that. How do we get there, Justin? Because we are not there at the moment. I mean, there are
Mm,
there are beacons of great examples of this, but
mm,
by the same token, and sadly they often hit the national press, what
mhm,
you thought was a beacon turns out to be something quite damaging and destructive,
Yes.
which saddens everybody. I mean, it certainly saddens
Mm,
me.
mm.
How do we get to this goal, this, heaven on earth, as it were? What do you
Yeah.
suggest?
Well, I think there are a number of things that we need to do. I think we as church need to demonstrate a whole lot more humility.
Okay.
I think we need to be prepared to face down those things that we have been a part of, which have not been great,
Yes. Yes.
and to be thinking very clearly, what do we learn from that? What can we change going forward
Mm.
in terms of what we learned from that? We need to get a whole lot better about holding ourselves accountable to others. Scripture tells us, surround yourselves with wise counsel. There's
Yeah.
good reason for that.
Yeah.
Accountability ought to be married with support. If there's accountability but no support, then we're on a bit of a wobbly stool in all
Okay.
likelihood.
Yeah.
But we need to be a whole lot better at holding ourselves accountable, and seeking out the support. We often say, church leaders these days, better than
Yeah. Yeah.
many, Richard, maybe. We expect so much of them.
Yes.
We expect them to be all things to all people, and I'm sure that that's not what they thought they were called to be. But because we do that, and because we then ultimately risk putting them on pedestals, we're
Mm.
heading for a fall. So when we talk about support and accountability, it's not reasonable that we expect everything, and we expect the leaders to support us and to guide us, to lead us, if they themselves are not being supported,
Yeah.
guided, led, counselled. Something's going to go wrong eventually. So I think there's a few things that we need to address there, but I think then more fundamentally, maybe we need to rethink what this whole notion of safeguarding or safer places is, relocate it very firmly scripturally,
Yeah.
so that we can strip away all the stuff which maybe has gotten us to where we are now. The bureaucratic stuff, the fact that the laws say this, the policy says that. It's all important, but they're vehicles for us to be doing what Scripture tells us we ought to be doing
Yes.
anyway.
Absolutely.
So if we reimagine that, if we refocus that, genuinely, I've been in sessions where we've been talking about that, and it's genuinely a light bulb moment for people. We never thought about it like that
Okay.
before. Well, that makes a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
So I think there is something that we need to do across the church to reimagine what this really is and why we do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if we understand that, safeguarding is a justice issue, as well as many others,
Mm.
and God is a God of justice. It's not only who he is, it's what he does. What does that then mean for me in terms of how I interact with others and uphold a sense of justice, providing safe environments that facilitate flourishing? It means that I've got to do a whole lot of soul searching.
Yes.
And I think it is an individual exploration as much as it's a corporate one.
Mm.
So I think there's just a rethinking and a reframing, a paradigm shift, if you like, because we got stuck.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think we have got stuck. And in some ways it's weird, isn't it? Because we got stuck in a paradigm that is ancient and historic, but we've
Mm,
also got stuck in a paradigm that is modern and trendy.
mm,
And both of them do not serve the cause well, because there
mhm.
has to be this middle place, doesn't there? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that we talk about flourishing, which I'm not criticizing at all because it's a great word and it's a great image and it evokes so much that's so positive, isn't it? Um, but
Yeah.
but one of the things struck me recently was you don't hear many sermons on holiness and purity these days. You hear about justice, but you don't hear about holiness. And I mean,
Yeah.
I think we've lost something in, this, we tip one way or the other, don't we? And somehow
Yes.
we need to hold justice and purity and holiness. and
Yes.
fullness, and I've come to give you life and life in all its fullness, which is flourishing. We need to somehow hold those together, and the church doesn't seem to
Yeah.
have been very good at that,
No.
particularly at the present time, and that seems a shame to me.
Yeah, I think that's so right, and that's probably because they are difficult issues.
Oh yes.
Somebody described to me, I think it was something some government advisor at one point said, that we have a tendency to put things into the too difficult box,
Yes.
and we put that box on the highest shelf we can possibly find in the hope that we won't come across it anytime soon.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
um, and I think there's a little bit of that in all of this because it challenges us to the core of who we are, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
But I remember standing in front of a whole bunch of people at New Wine, actually, a number of years ago,
Yeah.
and I said to them all, let's do a quick count. Put your hand up if you have either heard or delivered a sermon or an address or whatever on something related to safeguarding.
Okay.
Bear in mind, this is primarily a bunch of church leaders.
Yes.
Do you know what? Out of, I don't know how many people might have been there, maybe 75, I think 5 or 6 people put their
Yeah.
hands up.
Yeah.
And there is our problem,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
part at least,
Yes.
that as leaders, we have a responsibility, I think, to communicate the important things in life,
Yes.
to explore what the Bible has to say about them, to expound them to the best of our ability, to challenge ourselves about how we apply them. And yes, okay, abuse and harm in the church, safeguarding is a difficult issue, and it's one that we would rather not have to address, but we ought to, and there's an absence
Yes.
of it. So harm, abuse, safeguarding, justice, righteousness, holiness, all of those things and
Yes.
how they fit together. Wouldn't it be great if we heard more about that?
I think so. To be honest with you, I think so. And we don't at the moment. And maybe there's a swing
No.
coming, and maybe that's a good thing. And it's interesting because I never thought about this before until right now, actually. Because safeguarding is about purity. It is about
Yeah.
holiness. It isn't just about justice, is it? It is about
Yeah.
righteousness. And and
Yes.
and suddenly you're getting into an area that the truth is that most of those church leaders at some stage or another have preached on safeguarding. They just didn't recognize that's what they were actually doing.
Yes. Yes. That's probably quite right.
But it's so important, and it's important for our effectiveness in lots of ways, I think. Not because we've got to look squeaky clean, because actually that's a denial of our sinfulness in a way, but it's because we live in a world that so desperately needs to see it.
Yeah.
And not to see, personality and fame and people on pedestals, but to see the nitty gritty, reality of purity and the
Mm.
difference it
Yeah.
makes and the freedom that it brings. Because people see it as a bondage, not as a liberty. And that's a shame.
Yes.
That's a shame. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know, I quite like your world. I think I wouldn't mind being, a member of Justin's church if that's how it was. Because I think there's so much there
Well,
that's so positive and so
yeah.
freeing. And it's
Yes.
interesting to hear you talk about it and to hear you have the vision for it.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
absolutely, absolutely. Hey, listen, as we draw this to a bit of a close, is there anything that you desperately came on wanting to say, and I've not given you the opportunity to say it?
No, I don't. I don't think so, Richard. I think this has been a really, really encouraging and inspiring conversation from my part. Um, and I mentioned it before, but I think that it is fundamental to cracking this,
Yes.
and it is that um, if we were to see safeguarding, like the term or not, as our mission, what would that then look like?
Yeah.
What change would we see in our churches, in our everyday connections with everyday people? Because, and going back to your point, Richard, about, well, we probably preached it, but we didn't realize we were preaching it. Um, Jesus did all of these things.
Yes.
He didn't put a safeguarding label on it. The term hadn't even been invented at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
But he was doing it. And I think sometimes, the old adage, you ask a bunch of kids a question in Sunday school, and somehow the answer is always Jesus. The answer is, in fact, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
To this,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I would encourage people to just dig into that
Yeah.
and look at Jesus, the model that he gave us for how to dignify, value, and empower other people such that they could be everything they were intended to be. Because if that doesn't hit the safeguarding box, I don't know what does.
Yeah. Oh, totally agree. Totally agree. And in some ways, the dynamic is, Jesus sets a child in the midst of them. That immediately kicks off everything we've been talking about today, doesn't it?
Yes.
If you start thinking about the church from the perspective of the vulnerable, the least, the lost, and the lowest, it
Yes.
changes the dynamic of everything. And that's really what
Yeah.
you're about, isn't it? And that's
Yeah,
exciting to
absolutely.
me. That's exciting to me.
And it's what we should all be about,
Yeah,
I
totally.
would venture to
Yeah,
say.
I totally
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah.
Certainly people
Yeah.
in my position, and the role I play need to be about this without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Justin, thank you so much. That's really helpful. That's really
You're
good.
very welcome. Been great to chat with you, Richard.